This week on the BackTable podcast.
Going back to what John said about being at work all the time and like being there early and being there late, everyone's going to do that, and it's going to be driven by fear of doing something wrong or missing a detail, because missing a detail working up a consult as a fellow doesn't really mean anything because someone else is going to catch it. But everything, even though you might have a lot of support, you're going to feel like everything is on you and you have to dot every I and cross every T. I wish someone had told me how long that feeling would last, because then I would at least know that I had a defined endpoint. And for me in particular, it was probably around 3 to 5 months, which is almost akin to in fellowship when you become a little bit more comfortable in your skin and the procedure. Every single procedure is the hardest procedure you've done of that type in your entire training career. But after you get to the second or third one, it's going to become cake, and eventually everything's going to fade away and you're going to be trusting the skills that you've been taught during your fellowship, and that's going to kind of guide you along the way.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BackTable podcast, your source for all things interventional and endovascular. You can find all previous episodes of our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and on BackTable.com. Now, a brief message from our sponsor. RADPAD was developed by physicians for physicians. Clinically proven radiation protection during cine and digital subtraction angiography. Don't bet your career or your health on anything less. Trust RADPAD radiation protection shields for all your fluoro-guided interventions. See radpad.com for more information and contact info@radpad.com for a free radiation evaluation and a no-brainer radiation protection cap. And don't forget to tell them that you heard about it on the BackTable podcast. Now, back to the episode.
Today we have a great episode lined up. We're going to be talking about early career challenges with Junjian Huang and Sean Maratto. Welcome, guys. Welcome to the show. Thanks for reaching out, Sean.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Yeah, likewise. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so we're going to, first, before we jump into the meat of it, I want you guys to do a quick intro. First of all, the three of us have something in common. We all did our residency at Pennsylvania Hospital, so shout out to Pennsylvania Hospital and the folks that are still over there. I think, who was the chairman at the time, Sean, when you guys were there?
When we were there, it was Dr. Brian Englander.
Oh, yes, Brian.
Yeah.
So, Brian stepped in. He's one of my attendings, but he stepped in. He took over after I left, I think. Because when I was there, Dr. Love was the program director, and I know you guys had kind of a changing of the guard, but I'm sure there's some people that are probably still hanging around there, right?
Yeah, the core faculty is still there, still pretty strong, and they interact regularly with the residents who are now part of the University of Pennsylvania residency.
Oh, got it. That's right.
Yeah.
And is Jonathan still there in body?
Yes.
Yeah.
John Dorf,
great.
yes.
Yeah, Dorf. Yeah, Dorf is the best.
Dr.
I've learned
Dorf
so
is
much
awesome.
from him. Yeah. He was the fresh out, and that's what we're talking about today, but he was first year attending right when I started, and just such a great guy, even though, clearly, and we're going to talk about this, like those kind of feelings of being overwhelmed and stuff, but he always, and this is kind of like, I guess, a pearl, is like, he always took the time to just be with the residents, even though, the list might be crazy long and he was overwhelmed. He would sit there and take the time to teach you. You know what I mean? Is Simmerman still there, or was he there when you guys were there? No, gone.
He retired halfway through.
Oh, okay. Yeah, he was great too. But okay, well, let's jump into it. You guys are both in academics. We already know where you trained for residency, but tell us where you're at, maybe where you did fellowship, and what your practice looks like. Let's start with you, John.
So after I finished ESIR at Pennsylvania Hospital, I went to my fellowship in vascular interventional radiology at Mass Gen in Boston. And now I'm at the University of Alabama in Birmingham. Been here coming up on my third year. I joined in July of 2020, straight out of fellowship. And it's been pretty awesome. We're a group of 9, soon to be 11, and we're practicing 100% IR.
Very cool. And is Teresa still there? I know she just joined, Varian? Is that right?
Well, Teresa, you're correct, has joined Varian. She still has a clinical presence here.
Okay, great. But she's not chairwoman anymore? Is that right? Or
no, so she was our vice chair and division director.
That's right.
And so she had to kind of, remove herself from those roles for obvious reasons. But, she was awesome.
Yeah.
And that's actually a lot of, what I'm going to be talking about is how your leader can really shape your career.
Yeah.
And like, for me at least, it's been overwhelmingly positive.
She is great. She's been on the show a couple times. Her father was obviously a legend as well, been on the show. And so I, looking forward to seeing what she's going to be doing at Berrien as well. Sean, tell us about where you're at.
Sure. So just like John and yourself, I graduated from Pennsylvania Hospital and I did ESIR a year there. It was sort of in its infancy, during this whole transition to the new paradigm of IR. And then I ended up matching at Thomas Jefferson for my independent residency, as they call it. And straight from there, I was hired to work for a 4-person IR group in a system called Jefferson Northeast, which was recently required by Thomas Jefferson. It's a 3 hospital system servicing the Northeast area of Greater Philadelphia, with 1 flagship hospital and 2 satellite hospitals. I am currently completing my 2nd year in July. Unlike John, I took a month off after fellowship, which I highly recommend if it's an option for you. But since then, I'm in the academic. Technically, it's academic, and I have a assistant professorship, but it's more sort of a community-based hospital system. So I think along those lines, I'm going to be talking more about interacting in that setting versus kind of trying to stay up in the rat race of academia.
Yeah, and thanks again, Sean, for reaching out. And we've had Jefferson faculty on as well, including Karin Gonsalves. I wanted to start out by asking you guys, when you started in these positions, what were the expectations when you started? For example, was it to, like John, when you were recruited down to UAB, was it to start a new service line? Was it building upon existing service lines? Was it just status quo, like, hey, just come in and help, work the board, or all the above? You can just tell us a little bit about like what the expectations were when you started.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So when I was recruited, UAB was undergoing a transition. Some of the people we're talking about were on their way to different things. And then Dr. Creedy and I started at the same time. So when we started, the first thing I did was ask her, what do you want me to do? I'm the new attending. We have a relatively small group. I think of 6 people at that point in time. Like, what do you need me to do? And the ask was to build up MSK in pain. And luckily, it happens to be my interest. I did a lot of percutaneous ablation, pain control, and vertebral augmentation. So it kind of just fit right in the wheelhouse. And I was like, that's great. I'm going to do a build from essentially zero. And it was just a wonderful opportunity to build something from nothing and really have it built my way.
Yeah, that's fantastic, because it sounds like you already entering had the buy-in from your section chief. How is it with like the referring docs, the other departments in terms of buy-in, and even the administration at UAB?
Yeah, one of the great things about UAB is that everybody is very collegial. So you don't really have much turf per se, well, at least in my field. So, for vertebral augmentation, I remember when I offered it to the orthopedic surgeons and orthopedic and neurosurgeons, they're like, fantastic. We have a bunch of patients waiting for somebody to help. So had a lot of buy-in from referring docs. And quite frankly, every device that I've asked for spine has been approved. So there's definitely buy-in from the administration as well.
That's fantastic. I mean, it sounds like it was smooth sailing once you kind of, hit the ground. Were there any challenges that you kind of didn't expect, trying to build out this service line?
Yeah. I mean, challenges come, in different flavors. I guess one challenge was there's a new procedure that I perform called Superion. I did that with Josh Hirsch at MGH, and I wanted to bring it here. And the neurosurgeons pretty much told me, say, hey, if you don't mind, let's hold off, because we've seen some spine process fractures, and we would rather help you build other stuff first, which is incredibly reasonable. So I would say that's a hurdle. So if there's one thing I haven't been able to get through, I guess it's going to be spacers, but that's more of a conscious decision to kind of keep good relations with people. When they tell you they're not sure about something, you probably don't need to push it.
Don't push it. Yeah. So that's great. So it sounds like you have something to work towards in the future, right? It's not like you were given, everything, by walking in the door. That can cause problems too, right? Because then you can create a diva out of that, right? So it's, even though it's not intentional, it's kind of like when you when you walk in the door and you get everything that you asked for, it becomes, the expectation on the other side too. So it's kind of nice to have something to work towards as well. How long did it take you to get up? I mean, because you've been there a couple of years. Would you say the program's, where you want it to be, where you expected it to be at this point, or has it been slow growth or, fast growth?
So I joined at a very weird time. The people that did spines had left. One went to semi-retirement and the other went to a different system outside of the state. So I came in at a period of a vacuum. I also came in during the height of COVID. So in that year, I think we only did one kyphoplasty every 2 months. I've been here for 2.5, almost 3 years now. I did 15 kyphoplasties over a period of 2 weeks last month.
Yeah, so that's pretty satisfactory growth, I would say.
Yeah, I would say
he's definitely a hustler.
We're averaging probably about 10 to 20 a month.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, these kind of things come in waves.
Yeah.
And we do other things, like we do basic vertebral nerve ablation, which is also built up through neurosurgery and orthopedic surgery. And we're getting into the SI joint fusion game, hopefully. I've got buy-in from them. So, it's a constant hustle, and there's, going to be continuous growth. And right now, I'm still kind of the only person who's really gung-ho about this in my group of, 9 people. And as we get more people, I'm anticipating some people are going to be interested in it, and that's going to help jettison this to the next level. So I think, we still have a ways to go. I'm not fully happy with where we are right now, but I mean, you couldn't ask for a better head start.
Yeah. And before I get to Sean and where he's at, I wanted to, one more question. Because it sounds like you've built a successful spine practice, which is fantastic. If there was one thing, call it communication with referring docs, or one thing that you could attest, like really had a big role in getting to where you are today, just as advice for the docs out there that might be starting in July, what would it be?
Availability.
Yeah.
Be available. You're on vacation and you get a phone call from, a neurosurgeon, just answer it and just go, hey man, what's going on? And if you tell them you're on vacation, it usually earns you even more points.
Yeah, that's so true. And that is a common thread we hear on the show from everybody building new service lines is just, you got to be available night and day. So, well, thank you, Junjian, for sharing that. Sean, tell us about what were the expectations like for you joining Jefferson when you basically walked down the street. Oh, no, you didn't walk down the street did you train at Jefferson? Is that what you said? Prior? Yeah. So that's an also interesting thing that I want to talk about is you trained at Jefferson for fellowship and then you stayed on as an attending, and that can be unique as well. I was talking to my wife about this because she did that at UT Southwestern, and we were talking about the pros and cons of staying at the same program, right, as an attending.
So my situation is slightly different because our group is separate. It's under the same enterprise umbrella. Of Thomas Jefferson, but we function in under a separate silo. Got it. While I trained with Corin Gonzalez and Dave Eshelman and the rest of the gang,
you're not at the same site, basically.
Exactly. Now that doesn't mean that I'm not constantly in contact with them, getting help for things like that. But as far as I think I had a very good situation because my section chief, Stephen Wagner, was a former faculty member at Jefferson. He actually was asked to kind of head the project in the Jefferson Northeast, and had become, in contact with him, and he asked me if I wanted, to join their group as their older group was kind of, moving into retirement, and he explained to me his vision about building the 4-person group, and there was a high capital budget project that was approved to rebuild new labs, which are in process right now. So, but I think the thing that kind of goes along the lines of, where I was lucky with like Junjian was that he basically told me that I could pick a service line to build and I could do whatever I wanted with it. And for me, my passion was deep venous work because I worked with Ron Winiger and Rob Ford, who were, deep venous gurus in Philly, and Dr. Sidhedra was there, but he had left from Penn. So Jefferson kind of took over a lot of the deep venous work. So for me, I spent a lot of time in fellowship in those long chronic venous cases, which was awesome. And so in moving to the Northeast, my first goal was kind of how do I take care of this, because it's going to be self-motivated, a lot of the service line building. So I think, I'm not sure what John had said, but I think along the lines of being available, I think is very, very important when you first start out. And unfortunately, sometimes that requires you to, be connected more than you would like to. But I think as of now, so now I'm almost finishing my second year, I'm already seeing the fruits of my labor, and in the sense of A, a stronger service line, more patients, and B, I'm not being contacted as much off hours. People are a little bit more, they kind of respect the boundaries and things like that. So that's kind of where I'm at now. A lot of the stuff we do is because I still work in a community setting, is, you mentioned the status quo and building the service lines. And, one thing I really wanted to mention about that was, those kind of things are sort of the brick and mortar of getting our names out there. And, most people only know us for those things. So we have to, seize those opportunities to expound upon that. And John was explaining his, building a complex spine work. You can't really get into those conversations without doing epidurals, doing spinal nerve root injections, doing bone biopsies, lumbar punctures, silly stuff like that can sort of, amplify into the grander conversation.
Yeah, you're totally right, Sean. And I mean, just to give the private practice perspective and to build on what you guys were saying, I was brought in just for the status quo, literally to work the board. There was no like, hey, build this service line or anything like that. It was just like, hey, show up and do the cases that are on the board. And even then, it was really, and it took me a little bit of time to kind of realize it, but it was super important to get to know the referring docs on a first name basis, get their phone numbers, give them your phone number, because that communication and that availability, I think, led them to be more respectful and not dump garbage on you too. And I kind of learned that over time. Like the better you know them, the more likely they're going to send you good cases and not just send you garbage cases, which is a lot of what we complain about in private practice. I'm sure you guys get them too in academics, right? But it just comes with it.
Getting to know the referring doctors is very important. We've, in the last year, since, all the restrictions have been lifted, and we've basically, I don't want to say targeted, but we've kind of reached out and cold called the referring specialists, urology for PAE, even our vascular surgery colleagues. John mentioned, the turf situation, but a lot of times it just stems from not knowing, right? And so we don't know what the vascular surgeons want to do. They don't know what we do. They don't know what we're capable of. We took the vascular surgeons out to dinner and we had an awesome time. We, chatted about common patients, common problems, areas where we could help each other, what gaps we could fill. And, it doesn't necessarily have to be I take from you, you take from me scenario.
Yeah. And just going back to what I was originally saying, Sean, even though it doesn't sound like this has affected you at all with staying at, Jefferson, but some of the challenges I've heard from others where people stay at the same program where they trained at. And one of my attendings had this issue at Vanderbilt when I was a fellow, where they just felt like they were an eternal trainee, because you're there for residency or fellowship, you stay on, and it's like you kind of get this feeling like you're still bottom of the totem pole, and then somebody else comes in who, even though you're the same year, they still kind of, they have a little bit of leverage because they're coming from an outside place. Have you guys experienced that, or known anybody or any peers that you've heard complain about that? John?
Yeah, actually, it's a really good point. I watched it happen, so my first year here, we recruited back a former fellow, and I never met this person, but they're a year ahead of me, and so they are technically more experienced than I am, and would come in as technically my more senior partner. But I realized that when I do cases, nobody comes to bother me unless I ask for help. When this other individual does cases, people are very willing to give pointers, whether solicited or not. And I think, it's nice because people have a comfort built in, but it may also be perceived as, I spent many, many years training this person. I have a privilege, per se, to tell this person what to do next and to point out when they're screwing it up. As opposed to like someone you don't really know that well, you're like, well, maybe they're just doing it their own way.
Right. I think you could take it either way. Like it's either, like you say, it's a familiarity thing, or it's a micromanaging thing, or what I mean? It just depends on the personalities, I think, that are involved. And it is part of the culture too, right, of the place. So I do want to talk a little bit about culture. Sean was already kind of familiar with the culture at Jefferson, having been there. But Sean, you went to this community hospital. Was it different from like the home base, from the flagship shop, or did you have to kind of create or experience a new culture when you joined the practice?
So the cultures were kind of, it was definitely a culture shock, regardless of whether it was under the same enterprise flag. I went into a hospital system that was previously privately owned and was acquired by Jefferson. So probably 99% of the staff had been there and transcended the name and title changes. So I was walking into a very tight-knit group, not within the docs. The docs were all new because, as I said, Dr. Wagner was kind of starting it from scratch, but the staff in particular, very similar age to me. So everybody kind of had their way to do things, and they had expectations from the prior physicians in the group. But I think that's one thing that I really wanted to touch on. I think it's, we talk about very, very much so about building your service lines and getting your referring docs to know you and appreciate you and respect you, which is obviously paramount to the success of the practice. But I think for personal success, becoming a part of the group of your staff and really taking the time to get to know everyone and personally understand, especially when you don't have trainees and you have RTs that are next to you every single case, helping you, learning who you are, learning your body mannerisms during procedures and things like that. These things seem so trivial, but they can make a day so much better. And I think that should be the number one priority of anyone who's, not tasked with building a gargantuan service line when they move into practice. Becoming comfortable in your own environment is the most important thing, because you cannot be comfortable in other environments if your home turf isn't your home turf,
Yeah. John, any issues with like a new culture? I mean, it sounds like Teresa came in, so she was probably just getting settled in as well. But any culture, big culture shift when you joined UAB, I guess, kind of like how long did it take till you felt like, you were one of the guys, like settled in?
There wasn't much culture shock because I was raised in the Southeast.
Yeah.
So training, everything done in the Northeast, so kind of got to experience two very polarized ways of communication with people,
Yeah.
Like I tend to think that I'm probably closer to the Northeastern way, where if I look at you and I don't say hi, that's acceptable and I'm not mad at you. It's just like, that's just how people do things. But down here, when you see somebody and you don't say hi, it's perceived as pretty rude. Or when you talk to somebody and the first thing you say is what you need them to do, instead of, hey, how's it going? How was church?
Yeah.
Those kind of things. So it took a little bit of fine tuning for the emotional intelligence to kick in. And like most people I know, I'm emotionally intelligence challenged, I guess. So it took me a little bit of, time to kind of get used to fitting in that aspect, just kind of day to day. But in terms of working with, referring physicians, working with the team professionally, everything kind of just was smooth from day one, and part of that is because I actively sought out advice from mentors on how to behave and how to act in the first, 6 months to a year as a new attending, because I know me and Sean knows me, I can be very polarizing. You meet people usually say, I really like that guy, or they say, I can't stand that guy. Very few people are like, meh. So the question is, how do you get more people to be, I really like that guy?
I know, because I lived at both of those poles in John's life.
Depends on which side of the pole you got. So I would say that, you have to have an appreciation for cultural differences, whenever you join a new practice. And that could be from a region perspective. That could also be from a practice perspective. If people don't do certain procedures, don't try to reinvent the wheel. Like at Pennsylvania Hospital, we did everything. We did literally everything: biopsies, lungs, bones, angios, everything.
Lots of paras.
At UAB, paras and thoras. No, that's legitimate, because at UAB, body radiology does paras and thoras and biopsies. Chest radiology does lung biopsies and ablations. And then, neuroradiology does regular LPs. And MSK does joint injections and aspirations. So when I got here, I was kind of like, whoa, that's a little bit weird.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to go and say, I'm going to try to go and change the world and, do all these things. So you have to kind of try to figure out how you can fit in.
Yeah.
And I think people who learn how to do that quickly are the ones who are going to find more success instead of banging their head up against the wall.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, even from Philly, because I moved from Philly to Nashville residency to fellowship, and you go from Philadelphia where, you're not safe. You say hi to someone in the street, they think you're picking a fight with them, And then you literally happened to me like multiple times. And then you go to, Nashville where it's like, people are like asking you how your day is. You're complete strangers walking down the street. And it's just it was a culture shock. And the people are much less blunt, super nice. And so, I didn't even think about the cultural differences between Northeast and the Southeast. It's very true. And it affects every interaction, right? Referring docs, nurses, techs. So those are some great points. Anything that you guys came across that was, it doesn't sound like in your case at UAB, Junjian, but like, Sean, you're still in Philadelphia, and I don't mean to, rag on Philadelphia. It's still a great town, but anything that you've come across that's been like talks, because you're in basically a hospital that was private practice, which there can be these sort of toxic subcultures. And, have you had any of those kinds of challenges? And if so, how did you overcome them or get through them?
Do you mean toxic subcultures and could be more specific?
It could be a bad character, right? Like you got one tech who's just super lazy and like doesn't, they don't want to do an IR procedure. For example, I mean, I've had to share labs before with cardiologists, and you get some technologists and they're just dragging their feet and they don't want to do a case with you. And you got to figure out a way to get through that case safely and then figure out how to like not do any more cases with that person, for example.
So I think a lot of this comes with familiarity of the culture. And I think, John having experience too, and you having experience too, it's a navigating, any kind of conflict in a situation, right? So it's just a general conflict resolution where in Philadelphia, particularly in Northeast Philadelphia, because I know, Philadelphia can be a little, rough, for lack of a better word, but I think in the Northeast, they're definitely not rougher, but they're just more stronger personalities. And you just have to recognize, how to kind of navigate through the situation and kind of talk to them. And I mean, personally, I don't really have lazy techs, thankfully, but not just techs or like any other part of the department that doesn't want to do something. I think everyone's kind of has a very, Wagner was very good at making the focus and the mission of the department clear and unilateral, in one way, and everyone kind of jumped on in the beginning. So I think navigating those one-on-ones is really just a situational based thing.
And it does come to leadership, and a lot of times it's turning to mentors, right? So you kind of touch on this, John, is like seek, and this is going to be one of my questions is, how did you guys in the first couple of years, because for me, mentors were key. I was taught, you guys probably remember Dave Ball. I don't know if he was at Penn State while you were still there, but to this day is still one of my mentors. He's the guy who inspired me to go into IR. I called him so many times my first few years because, I was just like, how do I deal with this? Whether it was a complication or how to deal with a partner who was being pretty toxic. How did you guys already have built-in mentors from training, or did you seek out new people or find new people in your first few years? I'm going to start with you, John.
Once again, you ask great questions. You make great points. Mentors are key. And I think, every bit of my success that I've experienced is because I've had great mentorship along the way. I pride myself on being a really hard worker, but I truly believe that if I didn't have my mentors, there'd be no way that I could have done half the stuff. And it's a combination of everything you talked about. It's, you have mentors that you've developed through training, and, some kind of stick with you and some kind of don't, based on what you end up doing. And then I make it a point to keep on searching for mentors. And sometimes they're mentors that aren't related to IR. One of my biggest mentors here is the chair of surgery. I ask him questions whenever I have concerns about career advancement, because he happens to be an Asian American male who is a chair, and my aspiration is to be kind of like him. And even though he's in surgery and not IR, he's somebody who's navigated the nuances of, going through the process of ascending the ranks. So I turn to him for a lot of questions. And then I actually make mentors through industry. Sometimes one of the great things about what we do is that we get to interact with industry partners. And sometimes you will find people in the industry that can really help mentor you along in terms of how to think about devices, how to think about patenting. And one of my mentors here is actually our vice chair of innovations. And he's a AI researcher, and I don't know anything about AI. But he's a mentor because he does a lot of patents and business building. So, whenever I have questions about how to build a small business around an idea, he becomes a mentor for that. So I think you just have to find people that don't necessarily have to be in your field, but have skills and knowledge that can benefit you for various things. And then sometimes mentors will change. Sometimes mentors are going to be younger than you. Sometimes you're going to find people who you just think they have really good ideas, and you want to kind of pick at how they think, so that way you can grow your own, not only your knowledge, but your actual pathway of thinking, to try to see if you can stay flexible.
Yeah, I love that, John, because especially since you found mentors in sort of less likely places, right? It's not somebody in IR, and you got me thinking that like we tend to look for mentors that are just in our specialty, but that doesn't have to be the case, right? And that's great that you found somebody in your new, in your new practice location that is in a different department altogether who can help you out and be there for you. That's fantastic. Sean, what about you? How have you found any unexpected mentors, or has it been mostly people from training? Can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, sure. This is something that I feel very strongly about and very passionate about. Actually, John, was one of my mentors when I was a resident, because I really had no application for fellowship, and he helped me flesh my application out and strengthen my candidacy for fellowship. So obviously, hats off to you, John. But I think it's a moving target, just like John said, because at every stage in your life in this professional realm, whether it be training, post-training, or further out, you're going to have different expectations and different things that motivate you to be happy, and different things you need support for. So there are mentors that provide you support, like as you said, Aaron, in the case, oh man, I caused a complication, I don't really know how to react to this emotionally. You need someone who's going to be there for you, that's going to actually provide you with not just a way out, but a way to kind of cope with this, because these things are going to happen when you do procedures, right? And then you're going to have mentors that provide you with motivation to succeed and gain internal fulfillment. And those are the ones that, they might align a little bit more closely with your professional status. So, those are the ones that kind of get what you are doing and want to help you get further. And that kind of reminds me of John talking about the chief of surgery. He might not be an IR, but he's an Asian American physician who's in a position of leadership in a procedural field. Maybe not the same field, but it's pretty common, trajectories. So yes, I think that mentorship is, and honestly, when you receive mentorship and you recognize it, it is very important to pay it forward, because you need to make sure that the people that are coming after you experience the same insulation for their success and kind of emotional support that you felt, because it really just perpetuates the happiness that is our field and what we do.
Yeah, the emotional support is like number one. It's key, right? And I'm fortunate in that my wife is a physician, and and we all, because we're docs, we know like our social circles tend to be 90% physicians, right? I mean, it just happens throughout training, med school, training and so forth. But the mentorship piece with the emotional support is key, because a lot of times that mentor has been through that same thing. If they're older, if they're more seasoned, and you're right, Sean. I think paying it forward is huge, and just not. Otherwise, it could be a bit selfish to not be helping out the younger generation. But that's my transition to talking about the other life events that happen in early career, and that can be some of the most challenging stuff, right? You're finishing up training in your sort of early to mid 30s. Usually that's around the time when, we're getting married, we're having kids, we have to start paying off loans, we're starting to look at buying a house. all that stuff on top of being an early attending can be super stressful. Can you guys share any stories about, like navigating that and anything that's been particularly challenging for you, and any solutions or advice for those out there going through the same thing? I'll start with you, Sean.
Yeah, so I decided to do the shotgun approach for this, and currently just closed on a new house, and my wife is expecting her first child. So I think it's all happening at once. But
Cheers.
Thank you. But I think very early on in the first year, I mean, it's very, very hard to navigate outside of work when all you're thinking about is work. Not in a sense where you're obsessed with work, but it's just the anxiety that comes with it, along with the situation. I would say everyone at this point has to have some kind of understanding about what their emotional and psychological bandwidth is. So I think it's very important to be realistic about what you can and cannot do, not to overload yourself, because the extracurricular work that comes with these kind of things is obviously, like, having children is you can't put a time on that. You can't expect that to happen when you need it to. But I think, you just have to try and do the best you can to budget your psyche a little bit.
Yeah. John, anything on your front?
Yeah. So
you don't have to share.
I'm going to be honest with you guys. This part of my life is the part I suck at. Work-life balance. And Sean knows, I'm usually the guy there at 5:30 in the morning, and I'm there until like the short call resident leaves almost, So I've told my wife before we got married that work was going to come first. She still married me. Turns out, that's not the right way to approach things. It's interesting, people who know me will think I'm a hypocrite, but as I've gone 2 to 3 years into practice, my bit of advice is treasure the family time that you have and don't give it up for anything else in the world. Taking that extra call, doing that extra meeting, those are things that, people will ask you to do, and the things that you want to do for promotion, etc. But, when you think about what really matters, family matters the most. And my daughter's 7, and if I would say there's anything in my early career that I've regretted, it's missing all of those daddy-daughter breakfasts that their schools have. Not to say the food's good, it's just being there for her. So that way, when she's sitting there, eating and seeing all the other dads with the daughters, and I'm at work, you think about it, it's like, what would have that hour actually amounted to? Why couldn't I have just called in and said, I'll be there at 9 instead of at 8? The world's not going to end, but, my daughter's day would have certainly been a lot better. So those are the kind of things, you need to start thinking about, as you become a father or, mother, just valuing the children and spending more time with them when you can and when they still want to see you.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest thing.
I totally agree. The kids will break you, right? I mean, they're just, you don't expect it, because that was probably when I worked the hardest, was early career. I probably could work off of 5 hours a night of sleep every night, right? And then when the kids are babies, same thing. They're babies, they don't really know if you're there or not. But then when they start getting like 3, 4, and they really want to see you and hang out with you, and every time you come home, they're crying out "Dad" and coming to the door, that's when your priorities start shifting, and you're like, yeah, I don't really need to be there. I don't need to take that extra shift. And you hit the nail on the head, John. And Sean, this is coming for you too. It's just comes with the territory, I think, with having kids. And maybe it's a generational thing. I know our parents weren't like that. They just worked and worked and worked, and it wasn't the same relationship, I think, with kids and their parents as it is now. I think we tend, our generation and your generation, tend to prioritize that family time a little bit more, especially as physicians. So that's my advice. I echo that advice, John. I think it was solid. And Sean, congrats to you on starting a new family and all the good things to come too.
This is real-time mentoring right here. You see that? He never stops. He never stops.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Sean. So happy for you.
Thanks, man.
So I wanted to kind of finish up with one more thing in terms of like challenges. One thing that I found especially challenging starting out was this whole business side of medicine that, we're basically insulated from as trainees. Like nobody's teaching us about insurance or billing or marketing or any of that stuff when we're residency or fellowship. And then you get out, as an attending, and suddenly, you got to do these insurance calls and go out on, with the marketing folks and whatnot. Anything that's, any advice you guys can give on that front? Sean, I'll start with you.
For me, everything is pretty much, blank slate, and I had to do a lot of stuff on my own thus far. I think it's an opportunist situation where, some people are lucky enough that they have physician liaisons, and this is particularly for the marketing subtext, but I think, you just really have to kind of follow by example from other institutions and just try and learn the best you can on your own. I think the marketing in a smaller scale starts with the peer-to-peer relationships. Don't try and address full groups of physicians without each of them actually being able to associate your face with your name, because then you just look like a salesperson. I think if you have a personal relationship with the group, then you can address them about, how do you guys feel about UFE or UAE or, spine ablations, things like that. I think that's really important. As far as the billing and insurance things, insurance claims, and we're all familiar with that. We see it all over Twitter about who's denying what, who's paying out of pocket. I think this is a growing pain that we will probably have to suffer through for a long time until we have enough bandwidth and training or have our own, trajectory to add that in. But I'm not even sure any other specialty really has any kind of guidance in that area, in that realm either. And maybe that's to the design of insurance companies, or maybe not. I don't know. But I think it's just really, you just have to, you can't avoid it. If it comes to you, do not delegate it to somebody else. If you have a advanced practice provider in your practice, don't make them do it. Do it yourself. Feel the actual pain that they have to go through. And then that's the only way to learn, right? The only way to get feedback is to receive a stimulus. So I think that's the kind of thing you have to do on your own.
John, anything to add to that in terms of navigating these early career challenges when it comes to the business side of medicine, sort of learning, how to get paid for the procedures we do?
Yeah, so two things. First, marketing. So being in academics, thankfully, marketing is typically done by, big groups instead of just pure individuals. That being said, for me personally, in building service lines, one of the things I think about is, what am I trying to do? Like, who am I trying to help? And who do I need to talk to? And I find it easiest actually when the other party plays golf, because then I can just go out to the golf course and say, hey, let's go play 18 holes. And during that time, you get to have their pretty much undivided attention for 4.5 to 5 hours. You get to see what kind of person they are through their golf game, because you can see if they're like, very liberal with a little bit of relief, you know what I mean? Like kick the ball around, subtract a few scores. Or if they're very by the books, like they got the worst break in the world and they play it, you can tell a lot about people from leisure activities, and how they behave, to determine if that's somebody who you want to be a potential, partner in your practice. Not like co-IR, but like refer. Because if your referrer is, not going to be upfront with you, then you don't want to work with somebody who's going to potentially, do things for not so glorious reasons. You know what I mean? So that's one thing, is to kind of assess the field and make sure that your referrers they do things above board. The other thing is going to be about insurance and billing. So I do BVNAs, or the Intracept procedure. It's relatively new, probably been out for about 4 years now. It's got FDA clearance, 2019. And quite frankly, a lot of private payers don't pay for it. So I get tons of letters saying, we're not paying for this, we're not paying for this. And I have reached out to the CMO of one of the local healthcare systems here and actually got it approved. Like I actually found a way to get in contact with their CMO and sat down, presented the data, talked with them about it from a pure patient care perspective. And that was enough to convince them to pay for this procedure. Not saying this is going to work for all, but those are the kind of things that you need to do if you're really passionate about, what you do. And, that's kind of what, Sean was talking about. Don't delegate that to somebody. If I told my PA to do that, what do you think the chance of the CMO is going to listen to my PA? And then the other thing is you really just have to do what's best for the patient. If you do what's best for the patient, everything else will fall in line. So during my year at Mayo, they do this like orientation. It takes like 2 or 3 weeks of orientation. And that entire period of time is just keep on reminding you to reinstill that fire, that best consideration for the patient is the only consideration. And once you behave in that aspect, things just work out. Things will just fall in line because you're going to do a good job. And after that, you just have to make good business decisions. Once you've done what's right for the patient, then you just start working on business and then you can figure out how to do that. But once you have that first part done, everything else will fall in line.
That's great advice, John. It's funny, when you first mentioned the golf thing, I was like, oh, it's very old school. It's very Caddyshack. Take it out on the golf course. But I love that you're picking up stuff about them. You're actually evaluating them as are they cheating? Are they not kind of that extra putt? You're actually learning things about them as people when you have them out there. And that I think that's solid advice. I wish I was more of a golfer because that is such an easy thing too, especially if it's a hobby that you love. Most people, right, are willing to go out on the golf course and hit the ball around a little bit. My sport was ice hockey, so it's a little bit harder to get people out on the ice. So it's usually just, hey, I want to grab a coffee or beer or something. But all right, well, guys, you guys have given so much solid advice. I want to finish up with final thoughts. I want to know, now that you guys have been out a couple years, what do you wish someone told you when you were first starting? For those people that are they're finishing up next month, they're about to start in July. Sean, you mentioned the month off, which I think is solid advice too. I took a month off and it was fantastic just to have that sort of mental break. But anything else that you wish somebody had told you starting out? Sean, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think the one thing I really, really want to touch on is, the first 3 months of attending Hood, it was probably one of the scariest times of my life. I think, going back to what John said about being at work all the time and like being there early and being there late, and everyone's going to do that, and it's going to be driven by fear of doing something wrong or missing a detail, because missing a detail working up a consult as a fellow doesn't really mean anything because someone else is going to catch it. But everything, even though you might have a lot of support, you're going to feel like everything is on you, and you have to dot every I and cross every T. I wish someone had told me how long that feeling would last, because then I would at least know that I had a defined endpoint. And for me in particular, it was probably around 3 to 5 months, which is almost akin to in fellowship when you become a little bit more comfortable in your skin in the procedure. It's very similar. I will say that every single procedure is the hardest procedure you've done of that type in your entire training career. Every first port, every first filter, every first pick, every first midline, you're going to be sweating no matter what. But after you get to the second or third one, it's going to become cake. And eventually, everything's going to fade away and you're going to be, rest and trust in the skills that you've been taught during your fellowship. And that's going to kind of guide you along the way.
Yeah. Solid advice. John, anything to add to that?
I think, you hit the nail on the head. The only thing I want to add to that is, for all the fellows listening to this or me graduating, the SIR has an early career section. And if you are going into academics or private practice, it doesn't really matter. Just check it out, because that's going to connect you with people who are 1 to 8 years out of practice. And I'll have to say, all of us are more than eager to share our experiences and act as mentors. So, if you don't have a mentor or you're not sure, who to reach out to, just look to SIR. I mean, I'm pretty sure all the fellows listening to this, have interacted with the SIR at some point in time. So there's an early career section filled with people like, myself and Sean, and we're there for you. You can cold email us, and more than happy to chat.
Yeah. So I guess best way to reach you guys, we're not going to put your email in the show notes, but are you guys both on Twitter or LinkedIn where they could reach you that way as well?
I'm on both.
Both, but I am not a big social media person, so I don't mind if you share my email.
And I don't mind if you share mine either.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. Anything that I'm leaving behind that you guys wanted to get across that we didn't have time for?
I want to add one more thing to the last thought.
Yeah.
I cannot stress the importance of being aligned with your chief. There's one person in the entire system that you need to be aligned with. It's your chief. If you're on aligned with your chief, you're done for a ring career.
Start looking for a new job, basically, right?
Pretty much, like instantly.
That was something that I didn't have time to get to. And it might be a whole nother topic for another episode, is how to pivot, right? Whether you're pivoting a service line, you're pivoting a job, or pivoting, your staff culture. Like, how do you move that momentum? Because those are some of the horror stories I've heard. John is getting recruited somewhere, and either there's a change in guard of leadership, or the leadership's not what you expected, and then you end up finding searching for a new job pretty quick. So I'm gonna finish it up there. It looks like we lost John. Here, place to stop. All right.
Okay, bye.
Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, rate the podcast 5 stars, and share with a friend. If you have any questions or comments, direct message us at @_BackTable on Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn. BackTable is produced and hosted by myself, Aaron Fritts, and co-hosts
Chris Beck,
Sabine Don,
Michael Barraza,
Jacob Fleming,
and Ali Behetti.
Our audio team is led by Kieran Gannon, with support from
Josh McWhirter,
Aaron Bowles, Nick Shellcross,
and Ness Smith-Savadoff.
Design and digital marketing led by Brian Schmitz.
Article and transcript support by Taylor Robinson
and Delaney Aguilar.
Social media and PR by Ann Dang.
Administrative support provided by Jamila Kennebrew.
Intro and extra music is Ripperoo by Skeptic Moon. Find us on Spotify or at local live music venues in New Orleans, Louisiana.
Thanks again for listening.